Alison asked me 6 months ago, must have been 6 months ago, can you make a talk in the evenings for the students, for the public? And I said, yeah. And she said, what about? And I had no idea. So I was working in Myanmar, so I said, okay, Myanmar. And she said, fine. And give me a title. Yeah. You can always change it afterwards. This is, yeah. Once it's black on white, you don't change it. So I said, okay, urban future. So it stayed urban future, as you've seen in the announcements, Myanmar's urban future. But yesterday, this morning, I felt, no, there's a word missing. And there's a key word missing. And so I've changed the title. A small change, but a very critical change. The uncertain future. And in fact, the core of my presentation this evening, the key word is uncertainty. And Alison was already referring to it. There's a lot of uncertainty in Myanmar. Uncertainty about the political future, uncertainty about economic future, uncertainty about the urban future. I'm talking only about the urban future because that's where I worked. There's a lot to say about Myanmar, and there's a lot that we don't know about Myanmar, even about urban issues, which is a smaller thing in the larger issue of Myanmar's uncertain future. There's a lot that we don't know, which creates more uncertainty. So, I think this is not a very academic lecture, and I don't think it has to be an academic lecture. It's more a public lecture, giving you some insights in what the situation is in Myanmar at this particular moment, and the big questions, the big dilemmas, the big challenges that people in Myanmar face. And I'm referring particularly to the urban future, but it applies to other areas as well. Now, my friends in Myanmar would be very unhappy if I didn't start with this picture. This is the Shwedagon Pagoda. This is the center of Burma. This is really the place that symbolizes Myanmar and its Buddhist heritage. It's big, it's beautiful, and it's functional. And it still is the pagoda to go to for the Burmese. I have two friends from Thailand here, and I'm still going to say it. It's more beautiful than anything I've seen in Thailand. I hope they still talk to me tomorrow, but yeah, it is really functional. Hundreds of tourists nowadays come to Myanmar, and of course go and see the Shwedagon Pagoda. But it's so big, and it's still serving as a pagoda that you don't notice the foreigners, you don't notice the tourists, because the Burmese come here to pray, to worship. This is on a Sunday, and it's packed with people. So this is the center of Myanmar, of Burma. The history says that there are 3 hairs of Buddha somehow buried in the stupa in the center. Buddha must have a lot of hair because there's all over Asia there are temples that have that hair. But okay, so this is the commercial part of the story. You know, when you go to YouTube, you first get the commercial, and then you get the real story. This is just the commercial. Please visit Burma because they need your tourist money. But there are some questions whether you should visit Burma if the political situation is not going the way we all hope it should go. We have great hopes that this country will develop democracy and develop an economy that lifts a lot of people out of poverty. I've lived for 26 years in Bangkok, and I've been invited to Burma again and again and again, and I always said, no. it's the last year that I started going there, and it remains a dilemma whether you really help the country develop or you just help people in power to get rich. I'll show you some pictures, and I talk about it. Now, for those who know cities in Asia, the situation is not that different. When I show you pictures about housing or the city or whatever, you say, well, we can see that in Phnom Penh in Cambodia, you can see it in Bangladesh. It's not that different. When we talk about the transition, the economic transition, then China has gone through a transition, is going through a transition, Vietnam is going through it, Cambodia did. It's not that different. But what is so, well, let's say, challenging in Myanmar is that you have those two things going at the same time, economic reform and political reform, which is not what is happening in China, where it's mainly an economic reform. It's not happening in Vietnam. It's just an economic reform, and the party is still in power. Here, there's a pressure from the people, the Burmese people, to democratize. There's pressure from the international community to bring democracy. There's pressure from investors to change the economy. There's pressure from donor countries to change the economy. All that pressure is there on Myanmar to change. And the question is, who is in control of this process, if anybody, and who's going to make the decisions? And we're not sure who's taking the decisions in Myanmar. There's a president, there's a government, there's a parliament, but we're not sure who is really in power. Because, as I will show you, for 50 years, the military were in power, and suddenly they said, we are going to transfer power to parliament, etc., etc. Now, lots of people are saying, can we trust this transition? Is it real, or is it just to bring in investors' money? So, what is it that they see as the future for Myanmar? Those in power, those in the government or beyond the government. What is the future of Myanmar? Is it really democracy? Is it inclusiveness? Is it something that benefits everybody? Or is it benefiting only some people? And a very critical question in this transition, which is, as I said, is driven by all these forces of population and investors and international community and international donors. Can the government handle this process? Can it be in control? Let's assume that the government is an elected government, which at the moment is not really the case, but there are elections next year. Can Burma decide for itself where it wants to go? And does it know where it wants to go? These are very critical questions. Let me give you some background data. Very quickly, the history. I'm not going through the history. I'm not even an expert on history. But this is an old civilization. This is from the 9th and the 10th century civilization. The British came in the middle of the 19th century, so it became a colony. And then in 1948, Burma got independence. In 1947, Aung San, who was one of the leaders of the independence, was assassinated by some other people. He is the father of Daw Aung Suu Kyi, who is now the leader of the opposition. What is important is 1962, the military took power. The generals took power, and they kept that power for 50 years, until 2011, just 2 years ago. For 50 years, the military were in power, and they were not, they were imposing an economic and a political system on the country that didn't benefit anybody but themselves. Really, a lot of poverty, a lot of oppression, and very little freedom or economic growth. They closed the country for foreign influences. There were protests from time to time. There were elections, but then the military said, no, we don't recognize the results of the elections. You may remember 2007, the monks that were demonstrating and the military that crushed the demonstrations. But somehow, in this time, things started to change. Some people also linked the changes, the transition, to the cyclone Nargis, which brought the worst disaster in modern Myanmar history. A cyclone hit the coastline and it killed 150,000 people. And the government of Myanmar said, we can handle it. We will solve the problems. And they couldn't. It was too big for them. So the United Nations and NGOs and foreign donors said, no, you need our help. They forced the government to allow them to help the people. That was, they forcibly opened the country. And many of these donors are still working in the Delta area. And that was it, sort of opening the door to foreigners. And it may have contributed to the changes. There was 2008, there was a referendum. These were not related to each other, but there was a referendum in 2008 on the Constitution. The Constitution is not a very democratic one, but the ruling military won by 95% of the votes, so you can imagine how free these elections were, or this referendum was. But in 2010, there were freer elections. Still, the military have 25% of all the parliament seats just allocated to them, so they're still a very strong power. But somehow, 2010, 2011, things started to change. More political freedoms, more freedom of press, release of prisoners, plus opening up the economy. So there's transition. And this is what holds the promise for us to think, yes, Myanmar is going in the right direction. Myanmar is now even the chair of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and so it's somehow accepted as a nation within, it's considered a sort of democratic organization. A few more general data. Population is around 60 million. Now I say around 60 million. We don't know exactly because for 30 years there's not been a census. The last census was in 1983. So for us planners, no clear data. Now I assume that somehow they know more or less what the population is, but one of the things that I think next year is the new census. They're preparing the new census. What could come out of that census is how are the religious groups distributed over the population? Are there more Muslims than they expect or less Muslims than they expect? A lot of ethnic groups, are they bigger or smaller than what is assumed? There could be a lot of questions on this population census. Life expectancy is quite low for a Southeast Asian country. 62 is not very high. 25% below poverty line. Well, these are figures of the Asian Development Bank, but they have to rely on government statistics, so it's not very reliable, I think. Urbanization, about 1/3. GDP per capita, $850, which is also quite low. It's one of the poorest countries in Asia. The GDP growth, I put it in brackets. The government says 14.5%. The IMF says 5.5%. And some independent organizations, well, probably 4.5%. We don't know. There's a lot of things that we don't know. And we don't know if we don't know because the data are not there, or we don't know because the data are secret, or whatever. A lot of uncertainties about data, about decision making, about transparency. Myanmar doesn't score very well in the Human Development Index. Out of 187 countries, they're 149, so really at the bottom. Not very good. Briefly about the population, I read somewhere that there are 135 different ethnic groups in Myanmar. So it's a mosaic of different groups. Now, that's not very special. If you don't look at the colors of the maps, I just needed the map to show this. But if you take that strip of land from India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and China, there are hundreds of ethnic minorities who used to live in this area, but when the Mongols from Mongolia pushed down the Chinese pushed down the Burmese, the Thai, and the Vietnamese, and they came down and they pushed those original inhabitants into the hills and into the mountains. Yeah, rural development people will say the irrigated rice cultivation is in the plains, and upland are the minorities who don't have irrigation because rivers, they just rely on rains. So it's a very diverse population, and the government has been playing different groups against each other to keep control, and the ethnic groups have been playing the government against other groups. I was in Tongji in Shan State here, just to give you an idea how this works. Well, I don't know how it works, but this is an anecdote to tell you. We were doing a training program, and I was in a hotel, and one evening, suddenly the whole parking lot of the hotel was full of SUVs, yeah, four-wheel drive cars. I said, what's happening? Oh, the general of the Shan army has arrived. Who is the general of the Shan army? Oh, well, that's the boss of the army. So is that Shan army? Is that Myanmar army? No. It's a different army. You have the Myanmar army and you have the Shan army. How does that work? Two armies in one country? Yeah. How do they finance the army? Oh, we don't know how they finance it. Well, of course, you ask. This area, Shan State, is well known for its heroin cultivation. It's well known for its illegal logging. It's well known for its trafficking of Shan women into Thailand for prostitution. So you can imagine how the army is financed. These are warlords. Yeah, they're also independent fighters, and they are local politicians. It's a very complicated situation. So I said, okay, now I understand, sort of. And we drove out of the town to visit some place, and there were roadblocks with always young men with machine guns. And I said, oh, so this is the Shan army. This was just 10 kilometers out of the town. No, this is not the Shan army, this is the Pao army. So what is the Pao army? Well, that's another ethnic group with another army. And so the whole country is divided. There are 14 states and regions, each with certain level of autonomy. And trying to keep that country together is in itself a challenging task. Myanmar is a big country. It stretches from here, from all the way in the south, all the way to China. You hear a lot in the newspaper, you read a lot in the newspapers about the border with with Bangladesh, because there's this problem in Rakhine State of Muslims. They say Muslims from Bangladesh are coming into the country. But the border with Bangladesh is just short. There's an enormous border with India, a long border with China, and a very long border with Thailand. And these three countries are looking at Myanmar and saying, what's happening there? And what is there in it for us? Myanmar has a lot of natural resources, gems, jade, gas, oil. So it's a very interesting country for foreign companies. To show you how These countries are looking at Myanmar. Each of these countries, Thailand, China, and India, have their eyes on Myanmar. Start with Thailand. This is in detail. Bangkok is looking west and says, wouldn't it be great to have a deep sea port on that side of the peninsula here? Because the distance from Bangkok to the coast is only 300 kilometers. Now, Thai shipping has to go all the way down south to Singapore and up again in order to get to the Indian Ocean. It would cut the time, the costs, and everything immensely if they could simply cut through the island, the peninsula. Thailand had been talking for quite some time about building digging a Panama Canal across here, but that's too expensive. This idea of having a deep sea port on the Indian Ocean and avoiding Singapore would save them a lot of money, a lot of time. So the Thais are interested in developing a deep sea port in Dawei. The Chinese, there's Yunnan province there where the arrow starts. Yunnan is a landlocked province. They are looking down to a village town called Chokpuk. I have some support here, which is not very big. If they can link Kunming, the capital of Yunnan, to that port, they also don't have to go all the way around. First of all, go to Hong Kong or the Pearl River Delta, and then all around to get here. So while the Thais are looking at this port, they are looking at that port and trying to develop that port. India has some northeastern states all the way there. They're landlocked, surrounded by Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan. They're also looking at a port, again another port, Sittwe port. If they can connect the northeastern states to the sea, then they have an outlet and they can develop their now landlocked states, which are not very highly developed, to the sea and get into the Indian Ocean. Easier than trying to go to Calcutta. So you see 3 countries surrounding Myanmar saying, hey, whatever you do, give us a port. We are very interested in developing this port, which would be of importance, of economic importance, of geopolitical importance for these countries. To what extent Burmese people will benefit from all this is not very clear. Yeah, it's basically, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine went to Dawei and there's nothing, it's just a port. And what happens is farmers that have their land surrounded are just kicked off the land in order to build port terminals and probably an industrial zone that would create employment for some people who have to come there because there's nobody living there. The Asian Development Bank has been thinking about these land bridges between cities because there's a lot of landlocked area that has a very difficult outlet to the sea, and you need to be connected to a port to export your industrial products. So the Asian Development Bank has been planning, but not really investing, in economic corridors, linking Bangkok with Ho Chi Minh City, linking Da Nang with Thailand and then with Yangon, linking Kunming with Hanoi, linking Kunming with Yangon, etc. These are all just plans. Myanmar was not really part of this greater Mekong sub-region. It's not a Mekong country, and many of these plans were done before the transition started. But it could become part of this whole network of probably roads, railways, maybe high-speed trains and other means of transport, and then border facilities. If that would happen, obviously the country would change a lot. But who will then benefit from all these changes is then another question. Yeah, I've been to some smaller towns in the center north of Myanmar, and the municipality says, how do you see our role, our economic role? How can we develop? But these countries these cities are in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, now maybe a train will pass very quickly. They won't benefit. I saw yesterday on television, high-speed trains are being discussed in the UK as well. Yeah, and people say, well, what are the costs and what are the benefits? Yeah, to have a high-speed train running through a very underdeveloped country, you could say, is that the thing to do? Maybe it is. Maybe it brings in economic development. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah. Okay, no. Up. Yangon was always the capital of Myanmar. This is where the Shwedagon Pagoda is. But the military government moved the capital outside of Yangon, away from people, because the government and people, that shouldn't go together. There's no need for interaction there. So they moved the capital. They built a new capital, Naypyidaw, or in the center of Yangon, or just the capital. I've been there twice. It's very funny. This road, it's a tollway between Yangon and Naypyidaw. There's nobody on the road, only government officials and foreigners that have to deal with the government, and they drive up and down, because everybody lives here, but all the decisions are made there. So you get, it's for a transport man, you are a transport man, it's beautiful. It's just transport for nothing else than the idea that you have a new capital. And there's no development along the road. You would think you build a big road, you make use of that by linking towns or linking industrial areas, whatever it is. No, there's nothing. I had no pictures of Naypyidaw, so I went on the internet and I looked for pictures. And I found the pictures that I wanted, because all the pictures are the same. They show the roads in Naypyidaw, 20 lanes wide and no traffic. It's a very strange town. It's very spread out. You have the hotel area, and you have the shopping area, and you have the ministry area, and it's very far out. You can't walk. And then just crossing the road takes a long time, not because there's so much traffic, but simply because this one is 20 lanes wide. It's good for military parades, but it's not for, and there's no traffic. There are no cars. There's this guy on a bicycle. This is the capital. But it means it's a very inefficient way of governing the country. You have everybody living in Yangon, and you have everybody taking the decisions in Naypyidaw, and people move up and down. My boss in the UN, twice a week he would fly to Naypyidaw to attend meetings. I mean, imagine the cost of that. Yangon is a much nicer place. It's really an interesting city. It's an old city. The pagoda is there, and there's a lot of lakes and rivers. This is the old part. This is the CBD and the central business district, commercial area, with a lot of also high density housing. But if you go north, then there are a few sub-centers, but it's very low density with a lot of low-rise housing, and you see a lot of green. It's still a very green city. People in Yangon are complaining about traffic jams. Well, I come from Bangkok. These people don't know what a traffic jam is. But the traffic is increasing. And so this is the situation. I'll come to talk about Yangon more. In that CBD, there's a lot of housing, which I would think is needs some repair and maintenance. It's very dense. and another colleague of mine did a little sorry, there is, so let me just go back. There is a Chinatown, Chinese community, Chinatown like everywhere. Everybody's Chinese, I said yesterday, so also in Myanmar everybody's Chinese. And there's a little India. But that little India is no longer little India, because in the 60s when the military took over, many of the Indians left. And I had a colleague who did a little survey about the housing, and this is one of the points that I want to emphasize. Asking, so who owns this house, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the houses were rented. And who are the owners? Well, the owners left in 1960. And so who's now the owner? Well, the people who lived there said, we don't know. Every month somebody comes and collects the rent. But who the owners are, we have no idea. Land registration, housing registration, apart from the for the political reasons, is something that urban planners would think is a nightmare. The government, the military nationalized all the land. So everything is government land, but some land is leased to people for 30 years or 60 years or 90 years. So people who got a lease have a document. But then, that's 60 years, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, they sold. The transaction was not recorded anywhere, so the new owners got a document, but the name is the previous owners. Now, how many transactions have taken place, we don't know. Some people have a document of other people who probably died 30 years ago, and they say, we're the owner. Look, we have the document. Yeah, but it's not in your name. Who cares? Nobody cares now. But once this city starts developing, land values will rise. They are already rising. And ownership of land becomes a big issue. Lots of people have certificates which show that their land is agriculture. But in fact, it's residential or it's industrial. All these changes have not been properly recorded. And so when I go with a government official to some of these houses and would say, well, who is the owner? The government would say, this is not valid. This doesn't apply. Because this is not the same name as the person who lives there. He's not the owner. Who is the owner? Well, the name on the document, but where that person is. Maybe they're Indians who left 50 years ago. You have new developments, private sector development. And this is quite okay, but it is expensive. This is upper middle income housing. It's usually public-private partnership, and I try to find out how that works. Well, the way I understand how it works is the government gives the land, because it's government land. The private sector built the houses, and then 50% of the houses go to the private sector for sale, and the other 50% goes to government officials for their own private purpose, and that's public-private partnership. Isn't it? It's public, it's private, there's no housing finance sector. In fact, the whole banking sector is very underdeveloped. Now, this is part of my housing lecture of yesterday. The housing sector is not very developed. The banking sector is not very developed, and housing finance is basically non-existent. They've set up a bank now for mortgages, and they say it's to help the poor. But for the moment, the bank is just a shell. There's no money coming in, there's no money going out, and they haven't figured it out yet how to attract money and how to give money. The only thing they know is that they want to give it at 4% per year interest. That's the only thing they have decided until now. Now, they had an advisor on housing finance. He said, listen, if you start with 4%, try to attract money. If your interest rates in the country are 12 or 15 or whatever percent. One of those issues. Lots of people live like this. Poor people, there's no housing for them. The government builds houses, but then it's far away, or it gives land for the poor, but that's also far away. So people live along the river, along the lakes, mainly outside the city, because there have been 2 waves of evictions, of resettlements. People, squatters, were kicked out of the center, probably for political reasons. And so in the center there are not that many, well, let's say slums, but you find them on the outskirts of the city, on the riverbanks and in low-lying areas. And these areas always get flooded. Yeah, and some people tell us water comes up to here every rainy season. So it's not a great place, but you can see how they built on stilts. Here again, some of these people have been told, yes, we have granted you the land, meaning we've leased you the land. Again, story of the documents. You have documents? Some people say no, but we are the owners, but we have no documents. Or we are the owners, this is the document. Yeah, but it's not your name. We are the owners, or people who have... So there are all these situations which, at this moment, they're not very important because nobody is interested in that land. But once you start developing, even if the government would build infrastructure or dredge the river or whatever, the issue comes, are you the owner of this house? Are you the owner of... There are no documents. So land tenure is not quite clear. Housing is very poor. The infrastructure is a problem, and there's frequent flooding of these areas. When it rains, water rises to that level of where the houses are. One of the strange things of Yangon is water supply. This is a country with numerous rivers. It's full of lakes, it's full of ponds, it's full of streams, it's full of water. And most cities don't have a water supply system that provides water, whatever quality of water it is, to the population. Half the city, half the town doesn't have water. And when I ask my counterparts why is that, they say mismanagement. Not investing in infrastructure that supplies water. So, especially the poor, they use the pond. It's a fenced-off water body for most of the water except drinking. You can't drink this water. This is open to where there's mud and whatever. The cows going around it. It's fenced off to protect it a little bit. So this is the water for cleaning and for washing, etc., but not for drinking. Some houses have tube wells, so they get groundwater, but the groundwater is also not drinkable. This is Yangon. Very often it's brackish because Yangon is not too far from the river, from the sea, and so the water is salty. These people tell me for drinking water we have to go to the temple. The temple has a deep tube well or is connected to the water supply system, and then we fill our jerry cans with water. But whether it's Yangon or Mandalay or towns further up north, water supply in all of them is a major problem for a country with so many rivers and so many lakes. Government has been generous to some people, the people that it wants to please, like government staff. There's government housing everywhere. This is for railway staff. This is for, I think, for health department people. It's formal housing, but the quality is very poor. You walk up there and there are holes in the roof. The rain comes through the roof into the apartments. For the engineers, the steel rods are visible because it just falls off, the concrete falls off the of the roof. Water supply is not very good, but people pay very little money. And so they're happy. They complain about the infrastructure, but it provides housing. Here, it's almost free, so the whole family lives in a single room and attracts other family from the rural areas. So you have 10, 15 people to the room. And then there are 2 water taps and 3 toilets shared by so many families. So quality here is also very poor. Just for the last, I mean, I'm a housing man, so I show you the housing stuff. That was supposed to be a market. Why they planned a market near a water treatment facility. This is sewage, basically. There was a market near the sewage canal, but it didn't work, so they converted the market into housing. And there are dozens of families living there, but there's no toilets, there's no water supply, or there's one water point. So it's very poor conditions. This is the cleansing department, so it's the people who look after the cleaning of the city. This is, what I could understand is this is in fact that building on the ground floor. I think these are widows of cleansing department staff. There are 5 families renting this apartment, and each of them has 1 share of the apartment. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus the kitchen. And these, they have no income, so they can only pay rent per day. They pay 500 kyat per day, which is 50 US dollar cents per day to live here. I am very dense with all these children. Now, when you go to Yangon, when you sit in the plane, when you wait at the airport in Bangkok, you're surrounded by people who want to invest in this country, because this is a country that is opening up and creating opportunities for investors to make money. And you find Chinese from Hong Kong, you find Malaysians, you find Vietnamese, a lot of Vietnamese, Chinese, wanting to sell whatever it is, or wanting to set up a factory, or wanting to buy things. Everybody's looking at Myanmar. It's like a craze. This is the place to go. But then in fact, very few really invest, because everybody is saying, what's going to happen? Is the situation really such that I would put a lot of money in this country? I mean, this is from the New York Times. It says they turn into commitments, but if you read the article here, it says vague promises of dollars. No investor really thinks it is safe to invest, except there's one sector which is quite booming, and that's tourism. The whole plane is full of elderly British, Germans, Dutch, French, Italian, Spanish, Americans, Norwegians, Swedish, whatever, who come to see the monuments. And so hotel prices are going through the roof. When I came first time in September 2012, hotel room was $50. After 3 months, it became 80. After 6 months, it became 100. And then I started negotiating, listen, don't go up further because I have to move out if you go further up. People said, why didn't you bring your wife? And I said, I can't bring my wife to this hotel. It's not clean enough. Well, the clean hotel is around the corner. It's $235 a night. That's where it goes, because there are not enough hotel rooms. Now everybody is, the hotel chains are going to put up new hotels. Investors are looking for opportunities. But what will be their conditions? What are investors asking for? They're asking for a clear, if they buy land, they want to know that it's really their property or their lease. But the system is not yet ready for that. The laws for investment are not yet clear. The condominium laws are not yet clear. Currency exchange is a headache. If you want to go to Myanmar, you have to bring clean $100 bills. Not folded, not written on it, not stamped by anything. So when I go to Myanmar and I have to pay the hotel in cash, I have to go to the currency exchange at the airport and I tell them in Bangkok, I'm going to Myanmar, give me $100 bills that are clean. And they know, so they searched all of the whole pile for. Other people get stuck. I have friends who had to fly back to Bangkok to get the dollars because they run out of dollars. They won't accept it. So situation is not yet ready for a lot of international investments or visitors or business. And the question is also what's going to happen? The land is now government land. Are they going to privatize land? When the World Bank comes, I'm sure the World Bank is going to say, if you want to have investors, you have to privatize land. We've seen that in Cambodia, what happens if you privatize land. The poor always lose out, and the rich become rich. Is that where Myanmar will be going? I don't know. Do they know what they should? We had this talk about uncertainty. Do they know what decisions to take about land, about housing, about state enterprises? They don't know, and they're very worried. And people high up in government tells me, my bosses don't know what decisions to make because they don't know the consequences. Same questions came up 25 years ago when I had Vietnamese students and Vietnam reformed. And they came to me and said, you think we should privatize land? I said, not for me. I think it can be done. You can do all the business while the government keeps the land. But when the World Bank will come, it will say, privatize. What are the consequences of that? There's already a lot of grabbing of land by private people, by farmers, by military taking farmland away from the farmers who have no documents. That was your question, in fact. I said, it's on the slide. Does the government has the capacity to take its decisions the way it wants? Does it know where the country wants to go? When I look at China, a country that also has to take all these decisions, they're going very carefully, and they're testing, and they're trying, and they're going backward and forward. This country is under immense pressure to change in the next 2-3 years. How are they going to take those decisions? How are they going to know what the consequences are of those decisions? Even if they know the consequences, are they people who care of the whole population, or do they only care about themselves? We don't know. We don't even know who's in power, who takes the decisions. What I always say is, we want to be Singapore. One delegation after the other of government officials go to Singapore and they get a beautiful story from the Singaporean officials, how beautiful Singapore is. No, we want to be Singapore. Well, Myanmar is very different from Singapore, I can tell you. Singapore has, 5 million people, and they have 60 million. It's one city. They have 350 cities, plus a lot of rural areas, plus 14 states and regions. But this is everybody wants to be Singapore. So I don't think I keep on telling them, that's not what you can do. That's not what you want to do. Even the Singaporeans are not happy anymore with what happened to Singapore. So you better think very carefully where you want to go. What kind of country do you want to be? I don't know, and I don't think they know. Japan is already there. The JICA, which is the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, is making the master plan for Yangon. Now, why are they there? They are there as the advance mission for the Japanese companies that want to sell technology and want to invest in industrial in industries. So they have planned satellite towns. They've planned a special economic zone. They've planned a port. Again, countries are looking at Myanmar and say, "Oh, there are so many opportunities. You have 60 million people. Wages are so low. Isn't it beautiful? We can have our iPads and iPods and iPhones made even for half the price. If there's enough power supplies, electricity goes off after time." So the Japanese are planning an industrial special economic zone here near the deep sea port of Tilaba. There are farmers there. Well, bad luck for the farmers. Economy has to grow. We have to get investments. Japanese were rather embarrassed. They sent a team to see what they could do, what compensation they could give to the farmers. But in the end, the farmers, I think, just got their crops, the value of their crops, nothing for the land. Transport. Yangon is a very interesting thing. It has a circular railway around the city, which of course, if I think of Bangkok and how difficult it was to get mass transit system underground or overhead, they have a right-of-way for the railways, and it goes all the way around the city. It even goes to the airport. It's beautiful. So, I mean, every urban planner says this is what we need to develop, and of course JICA says, the Japanese say, "Oh, we have the equipment, we have the trains." So that's of interest to the Japanese to develop. Whether that's should be a priority for the country or the city, you can debate. I think as traffic jams increase, mass transit could be an answer, yeah, to make sure that people don't buy a car, but get into the transit system. Once they have a car, don't get them out. Oh, by the way, just a footnote, anecdote. Of course, Burma was a British colony, so they drive on the left side of the road. Until 20 years ago, when the government decided, no, we want to be a modern country. Sorry. We drive on the right side of the road. But it must have been not a very strong decision, because all the cars have the steering on the right and they drive on the right side of the road. And it's very strange. All the buses, all the cars, new cars, all have the steering on the right. And they say, yeah, but because we buy it from Japan, second-hand cars. But it's not just second-hand cars. Steering on the right. People are used to driving on the right with the steering on the right. For the last 20 years, what? I don't know. Oh, and there are no motorcycles in Yangon, which is something amazing, because Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila, you name it, Ho Chi Minh City, all motorcycles. Now, the story is that a general got annoyed by the motorcycles for some reason and banned all motorcycles in Yangon. In other cities, it's okay, he wasn't there. Yeah, but in Yangon, there are no motorcycles. Okay. So this is the CBD area, and it's under pressure, under economic pressure to develop this into the new Singapore. It's a very high density area, lots of housing, lots of shops, lots of workshops, little factories. And that is more of the real CBD, yeah, the commercial area with banks, etc., etc. Of course, I told you that the capital was here, and then they moved the capital. So all the government buildings that are here are basically empty. This is the city hall, I think. Isn't this a beautiful building? This is a secretariat building, and it's empty. And it's been empty for 6 years, 7 years. it's a beautiful view also. This is the two rivers that come together and then go to the sea. These are old buildings. These are colonial buildings. And the Yangon Heritage Trust, architects that want to save the city from complete demolition, like what happened in Singapore, hope to protect these buildings and hope to protect the atmosphere of the city, because it's really interesting to walk around. Now, the minister is not very interested in this. He says, this is not a cultural heritage of Burma, this is a cultural heritage of Britain. So we're not very keen on this, but there is a major effort to try to protect this kind of buildings. People who, I mean, when I came for the first time to Yangon, it reminded me of South Asia. And friends of mine said, yeah, it's a Bengali city. Yeah? It looks like Calcutta. It doesn't look like Bangkok or Southeast Asia. It is really part of South Asia. The other cities are more Southeast Asian. But there are all these buildings that people who know Calcutta would think, yes. So this is the Strands Hotel, and that is the High Court. I don't know about these buildings. Somebody in the audience can tell me what it is. These are really magnificent buildings, and of course it requires investment, it requires protection, it requires regulations to develop these into hotels or apartments, but it could be done. Yeah? But there's a lot of pressure on building owners around Yangon to demolish, because land prices are going up very rapidly. And you have housing, multi-storied housing, not apartment buildings, but what I showed you earlier. Landowners, building owners go to the municipality and say, could you please declare this unfit for habitation? Because if you can declare it unfit for habitation, I can demolish it and I can sell it for a good price. So demolition is the order of the day. This is a major road, and building after building after building is being demolished for, well, if Bangkok is the example, it's for shopping malls. Yeah? It's for luxury hotels. Now, if Yangon in 10 years' time will look like Singapore, is it still of interest to tourists? I mean, Bangkok, Singapore, I was in Sydney. Sydney and Singapore looks like the same thing. Yeah, it's all that kind of high-rise buildings. Is that what tourists want, or do they want to walk around in these streets and see the little shops and the little cafes and the little restaurants? And it's a decision again. Where do we want to go? Yes, I'm coming to almost the end, I think. Miss, oh, chairperson. You're not chairing. Not even giving me a sign. As I said, I was in, let me see what comes after here. Yeah. We were in towns here up north, in Shan State and in Sagan State here. Small towns, 200,000 people, 100,000 people, 150,000 people. Like this is Tongji, capital of Shan State. There are a lot of these towns in the center and in the north, and they're asking us, so what do you see as the economic future of our town? What is there? Yeah, half of this town doesn't have water supply. What can we do? Well, that's not an easy question. Yeah, the investors, as you saw, are going to the coast. That's where they want to develop the ports, the industry, etc. These smaller towns have all those people, but don't have capacity to manage the city. We were interested in housing, but if you see the extensions, the municipality says, guys, we have no capacity to plan this, so just we allow you to build, and you get this kind of semi-formal, semi-informal urban extension, no water supply, no roads, water from wells or from tube wells. We met this guy. He had just spent $1,100 on the land and $2,000 on the house. Documents, no. He bought the land from somebody who says he was the owner, probably a farmer, but the land is converted now to residential. He said, no, I'm okay here. I'm not too bad. So they're investing, but there's no infrastructure, there's no road, there's no water supply, there's no toilet. He has a tube well there on the left, he has a toilet here, and just a little shack. I was telling Alison this story. We went to these people who are living on the edge of the lake, water this high in the house. It was a rainy season. There was a whole group of women around us. And I wanted to know what their situation was, what they felt about the situation. So I said, well, what are your problems? Problems? We don't have problems. This high in the water. Are you happy here? Oh, yes, we're okay. What about your children? Do you go to school? No, we don't go to school. Why not? Well, why go to school? What do you want your children to be? Oh, like their father, work, factory or whatever. It was, if you ask that question in Yangon, they will say, no, we want our children to go to school and learn. But opportunities there are not that great, so it was a bit disappointing, I was a bit shocked. Cities grow. This is Mandalay. Mandalay, famous from Kipling. He never got there, and I don't know why he wanted to go there, because it's not a great place, but anyway. Mandalay is growing. Lots of houses are being built. It's not much land, because it's again along the river. Lots of lakes. So farmers used to grow crops there, and then they converted the lakes into fisheries, and then they saw that land for housing is much better business. So they're asking people to fill up the lakes with garbage, with solid waste. Now, it's not very solid. When it's a bit heavy, then the whole thing sinks. We were taken to a place, and somebody was just, and the whole house went up and down and up and down. It's just almost floating houses. There's no land, there's no infrastructure, there's no development. This is, what's this? Is Monua. No, it's Tongji also. Municipality doesn't have the capacity to develop the city. They need more training. This is what happens to the solid waste. The truck comes and dumps it along the road. It falls in the river and it's washed away, and the problem is gone, isn't it? So, I mean, it's not a small city. It's quite a city, but management is an issue. So, these local governments are then saying, what is there in it for us? This transition, this reform, this opening of the country for investors and this development and democracy. What is there in it for us? Is the government prepared to say to investors, go here, when the investors want to go down there, where the sea is and where the ports are? A lot of the population lives inland, where economic opportunities are very limited. Now, if you get those economic corridors, those roads and those trains and those high-speed trains, would it help those cities? Would the train stop there? Who knows? I mean, infrastructure in the whole country, in the whole urban areas, all is very poor. There needs to be immense investments in infrastructure. The whole land and housing situation is unclear. And investors, when they want to come in, they will say, clarify for us. What are the rules? What are the regulations? There are no building regulations. Or there is something from colonial time of Britain. This is the usual thing. Yeah, we have the law of 1839, which, whatever. Housing, my area, is a big problem. And what I can see happening is when the investors come, lots of houses will have to be demolished to make way for the hotels. And the government institutions are not ready for all this. Yeah, the ministries and the local governments are not organized, or don't have the capacity to take decisions that will help the country forward. So we were involved in capacity development of local governments. But the question there is, are these people who are in power, in position there in the local government, are they really interested and capable of running a city and promoting economic development? And if they are, how inclusive is their policy? Are they interested in sharing the benefits? Or are they interested in keeping it for themselves? Now you say, oh, you're a pessimist. I've worked for 25 years in Cambodia. Cambodia went through this stage. They privatized land, they privatized this, they privatized that. And the beneficiaries were very clear. They were the people in power and nobody else. And you could easily say, in that respect, Cambodia is a failed state. When I talk to government officials in Myanmar, I say, listen, stop looking at Singapore. That's not the example that you should think of. There are two countries that you can think of. Think about Cambodia. Learn from that. That's not what you want. I think that's not what you want, but who knows? Look at Thailand. Thailand is not the best of the best, but at least there is more going than in Cambodia. Now, those are examples that are not the ideal. Thailand is not the ideal, but there are lessons that can be learned about economic development, about democracy and not democracy, about sharing the benefits, about the environment. It's not ideal. I see her. No, it's not ideal, but there is progress. On the other hand, if you look at Cambodia, which is in a very similar situation, which was in a very similar situation to Myanmar, and you see how the government, I'm not allowed to say rude words because they put it on the internet, so I said they made a mess out of it. Don't use the F word. They really made a mess out of it in Cambodia. Now, will this country manage to do it? Can they control that process with all that pressure? Pressure from the people, we want democracy. Pressure from the investors. The pressure from the international community. We don't know even who is in power. And you may have heard for the last few months, there have been these violent clashes between Muslims and Buddhists. And everybody's asking, where does this come from? And many people are saying, certain powerful people have an interest in destabilizing the country so that they can come back and say, listen, this country has to have a firm hand. We don't know. We don't know how these clashes between Muslims and Buddhists happen. It's a very dangerous thing. I've seen it in Sri Lanka where it started small and it took 20 years to get over it, and it's not even over yet. There were bomb explosions, 10, 15 or something all over the country. Who did that? Nobody knows. Everybody's worried because this is the uncertainty. Where are we going? Are we still on the road to democracy? Are we still on the road to economic reform? Are we still on the road to an open economy, an open country? Or are there people who have interests in turning the clock back? Or at least seizing more powers than they now have and saying, no, we really need to control the transition. And where is it going? We don't know. We hope. We pray. We go to the pagoda and please. So does the government have the power? And does those people who if it's not the government, if there are powers behind, what do they have in mind? And we hope that these children have a better future. Thank you.